It's not just radio, it's Rockland World Radio. RocklandWorldRadio.com.
Welcome to Sober University, your next step to successful recovery, with Cheryl Adler, who says if you are going to crave anything, crave living life to the fullest, maximize all you have, and squander nothing. This program provides information to help you get your physical, mental, and spiritual house in order. And now, the host of Sober University, Cheryl Adler.
Welcome to Sober University. Tonight's show is sponsored by me, Cheryl Adler, and my book, Sober University, Your Next Step to Successful Recovery. You can buy my book online via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and most other online booksellers, or right here in Nyack at the Pickwick Bookshop on Broadway. Contact me anytime on my website, soberuniversity.com, or my private psychotherapy office at 845-358-4652, or at my home away from home, rocklandworldradio.com. Please join us tonight by logging into our live chat room here at rocklandworldradio.com. Your questions and comments are very important to the part of our show. And call in with questions and comments as well at 353-2910. I'd like to welcome back my encore guest, Dr. Frederick Drobin. Welcome back, Fred.
Thank you.
And Fred is a 12-step counselor right here in Nyack with his office right in the heart of town, and he can be reached at 845-358-4752. And please visit his website at drdrobin.com. So we're going to pick up where we left off last week. Our topic is psychotherapy and spirituality. And I'd like us to just dive right in. And my first question to you, Fred, is going back to our first conversation last week, you observed that early on in AA, developing a spiritual life became an essential aspect of recovery.
Yes, Cheryl, as we talked about in the early days of AA, Bill W. had this friend, Ebby, who had a horrible time with alcoholism, and he consulted with Carl Jung, Freud's former colleague. And Jung told Ebby that he'll never get sober until he gets a spiritual life. And since that was really like talking a foreign language to all these people trying to stay sober, they puzzled over it and decided that Jung was right, and that's how they had to go. And that was the foundation of the 12 steps. Ebby's wisdom to Freud that recovering alcoholics need to develop a spiritual life in order to stay sober. So that's how this all became part of AA. It started right at the very beginning.
Well, we can see by looking at the 12 steps that it does call upon a person to really develop a spiritual life.
Yes.
So how does one go about doing that?
Well, the steps are a good guide. So taking the steps seriously is something that people have to do. But AA people have a struggle with this because so many people have gotten burned with an established religion. So what you hear in AA is the spirituality is different from religion. So there seems to be a conflict there. I don't think there's a necessary conflict because the religious traditions in human history have always supported spiritual development. But that's something you hear from recovery people, that this is a spiritual program, it's not religious.
That's what they say about the 12-step program.
Yes.
They emphasize the spiritual nature.
It's a spiritual program, it's not a religious program.
Uh-huh. Do you care to comment on that?
Well, I have a problem with that kind of strict dichotomy.
Because it's not so split.
Well, yeah, it seems like a split, unnatural split, especially since recovery meetings take place in religious institutions, in churches and synagogues.
If you really think about that.
Yes, yeah. But
Yes.
That's what you hear. This is a spiritual program, it's not religious.
Uh-huh. But they all do take place in synagogues
For
and
the
churches.
most part, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
case.
Many churches.
Actually, Bill found his first colleague, Dr. Bob, by calling a Methodist minister out. Bill was out in Akron, Ohio, doing a business deal, and he was trying to stay sober. He was trying to stay away from the bar and the hotel.
Where he probably had done business all the time that way, right?
Yeah, and he noticed the church board, the board in the hotel room that had the times of the various services in the churches in Akron. And he started calling them and asking the various pastors if he had a drunk in his congregation who could help him stay sober tonight.
What a wonderful idea.
Well, they thought he was out of his mind. And the Methodist pastor says, yes, we have this person called Dr. Bob, and he's struggling with alcoholism. If you want to give him a call, here's his number. And that's how Bill met Dr. Bob. It was through a church connection.
Well, wasn't that in the movie that Bill Borchert
It probably
had made?
was, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great movie. I think we should encourage people to see that movie.
It's called My Name is Bill.
Yeah, great movie.
It said it was produced for TV, but James Woods plays Bill W., and he does a good job.
He's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, the story of Bill W.
The story of Bill W.
Yeah, yeah. So he needed the drunk, who was Dr. Bob,
Dr. Bob.
to help him.
And the two of them kept each other sober that night.
And so that, would you say that's a form of sponsorship, having that kind of assistance or that kind of support?
It was supportive friendship,
That's beautiful.
and that was the foundation of AA.
That was the foundation.
We help each other do this.
Yeah, because we really can't do it alone. We really need
Yes.
to have our
Yes.
minion,
Yes.
our connections
Yes.
with people who are struggling the same struggle, a similar struggle.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Fred, you talk about the paradoxes in the dialogue between recovery, spirituality, and psychotherapy. Can you explain what those paradoxes are?
Yeah, I call them paradoxes. Other people may say they're conflicts. All right, for me, it works like this. Recovery people are encouraged, on the one hand, to develop a spiritual life. And now in the new AA, they're also encouraged to enter psychotherapy. Now, that latter thing is a new look for AA. And originally, AA people kind of shunned away from psychotherapy.
Right.
Because they were so insistent on assuming responsibility for your own problems. Why blame your family for all of the dysfunction and unhappiness and all of that? But it's sort of that's kind of changed, and so you occasionally hear about the new AA, which is where probably 50% of the people who are in recovery are also pursuing psychotherapy. So you have a number of processes going on. There's recovery, there's a spiritual life, and there's sometimes psychotherapy added in there. And that can lead, I think, sometimes to certain kind of conflict.
What kind of conflict?
For instance, 51% of psychotherapists are atheists, according to the research that I've met. And so you consider that particular dynamic. How are you going to be able to get help with your spiritual life from a therapist who doesn't believe
In the spirit.
in the spirit?
That could be problematic.
May be devaluing the process. So
That's right.
that's one paradox. That's one conflict.
Exactly.
And then are those things going to be able to work together? Recovery, psychotherapy, spirituality, are those various processes going to be able to work together? I encountered a woman in graduate studies in the school where I did my PhD work. She's a Buddhist nun, and she went into this program knowing that she would have to enter psychoanalysis. And she was having a real conflict because her spiritual director in Buddhism was telling her one thing, but was totally uninformed about psychoanalysis. And her analyst was an atheist, and he was totally uninformed about...
She must have been mighty confused.
Yeah, I told her... you can only walk one path at a time.
That's very good
yeah,
advice.
so do your analysis, and you'll be able to come back to your Buddhism later. Just yes him for a while.
Uh-huh. And so did that work out?
Well, we haven't spoken since that initial conversation, but I kind of wondered whatever happened to her about that. The processes should not be conflictual.
They should be really in sync.
They should be able to be integrated.
Yes.
So I like to hear from people how that happens, what the particulars are, how that happens in their life.
But I think as we had been exchanging our own ideas about this, that it's so very important to find from the beginning a psychotherapist who is very, very well versed in the 12 steps.
Yeah, well, lots of luck.
Well, we have to give some hope to our listeners.
Yes, what I hope is that folks find therapists who are familiar with the 12 steps and are able to help them and not get in the way. There should be people like that around.
Or at least to be able to acknowledge the very deep importance of having a spiritual life and not dismiss it as some sort of silly idea.
I heard a woman in early recovery speaking at a meeting where she said her therapist told her that love your enemies doesn't work.
Amazing.
And she was Catholic, and he was referring to Jesus' phrase, love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you, etc. And he told her, love your enemies doesn't work. And I wondered, where did he get the data for that? It was obviously his own prejudice, maybe his ignorance, that evoked that comment. And I told her, maybe it's not supposed to work, but it's the right way to behave.
Right.
And so that's why it's there. And she agreed with that. So occasionally you'll find therapists that are pretty uninformed.
They're pretty clueless.
Yeah, pretty clueless about the spiritual life.
Right.
You do find therapists, on the other hand, who have taken the time and effort to make a study of it. Remember, most of the people practicing are trained in behavioral sciences. There was nothing in most of the training, it's all secular, there's nothing in their training about developing religion or spirituality or anything like that.
Pretty devoid.
It was pretty devoid. Back in the 50s, a group of psychologists left the American Psychological Association and started the Catholic Psychological Association because they're uncomfortable with the atheistic bias of APA. They became so numerous that non-Catholic psychologists joined them, and they became psychologists interested in religious issues, Division 36 of APA. And in the 90s, they changed the name of it to just Psychology of Religion, whereby there's room for the dialogue.
Thank God.
Between
Finally.
Psychology and religion. So there is something out there in the field that's trying to mend the rift between the two disciplines. But it's not a given. It's not a given that you'll find a therapist.
No, but people who live in this area really need to know that you're here and this is the work that you do.
Well, it's the work that I do and other people that I'm connected with. And it's an exciting area, I must admit. I couldn't imagine doing psychology just from a secular point of view.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's some of the paradoxes and conflicts that go with this this mix of recovery, psychotherapy, spirituality. What do we make out of the mix?
And
I hope people get the best help that they can find.
Absolutely. So it might be worthwhile to look online, perhaps to that organization that you had just mentioned, to find people who are clearly interested in working with people's development of their spiritual life, and see the value of that in the development of their psychology, that they go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. They're not separate. And you certainly do not want to work with a therapist who's not interested in your spiritual life if your spiritual life has deep meaning for you.
Okay. So how do you tell?
Yeah, how do you tell?
How do you tell? I think sort of a litmus test is when you get to the fifth step. If you've done the first 3 steps and then number 4, the moral inventory.
Right.
And step 5 is that you share the data from your moral inventory with another human being.
Right.
And if you choose your therapist to be that person with whom you share, if they poo-poo or dismiss your moral struggle, then leave them.
That's right.
Okay? If they don't take it seriously. Like saying, oh, lots of people have those faults. Why are you so upset about this?
Yeah, what's the big deal?
Yeah, what's the big deal?
Because it's a big deal to you.
Yes, it's a big deal to you, and it has to do with your moral growth.
Exactly.
So if a therapist can't take this seriously, you need to find another therapist.
Exactly right.
And then also to help you with the rest of those, especially the 4th to the 9th step. Those are crucial steps in the recovery process, and hopefully a therapist to be checked out about it.
Yes, and I also want to emphasize to our listeners that we're not just talking about alcoholism, we're talking about any addiction.
Yes, any addiction.
That the 12 steps apply to all addictions.
They do.
And so, think big when you're thinking, think expansively about whatever you're struggling with, that it's not just alcohol. And that a good therapist who is well connected to their spiritual life and wants to help you connect to yours will be deeply concerned and very much interested in your struggle and to be with you through that struggle. And I think a lot of people who are in the early parts of recovery, because they've been numb for so long, will become frightened and overwhelmed by the feelings that surface in the beginning. They'll feel flooded. And so it's important to be with a therapist who can really encourage you to stay with the struggle. Don't run away from it. Don't get into another distraction, but stay in your struggle so you can get to the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, last time we talked about the purgative way
Yes.
in spiritual development, the way of purgation. After the pink cloud, the pink cloud dissolves and goes away,
Right.
and then all of a sudden you feel worse than you ever did in your whole life.
Right.
That's the purgation.
And that's the part people run from.
That's what people run from, understandably. It's not comfortable.
Right.
But it can be survived, and coming out the other side of it, you're a different person.
Hopefully you're a more true to yourself person.
Mm-hmm. As one of my teachers said, you're shaved and deloused.
It's so attractive.
Yeah, so attractive. And then comes the way of illumination, of waking up.
Yes. Seeing the light.
Yeah, it's like it's not a summer day; it's a spring after a rainstorm.
That's beautiful.
A spring day after
I can
a rainstorm.
smell the air when you
Smell
say
the air,
that.
yeah, been cleared out.
Yeah, clear it out.
We talked about last time. It doesn't come upon you suddenly, all of a sudden, but at some point you feel like you're in a new environment, even though you haven't made a geographical change.
Well, the environment is yourself.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
You're experiencing more of yourself.
yes, in a much healthier way.
Yes.
Yeah. It's all good.
Yeah, it's all good.
It's all good. It's difficult, but doable. And I think that's another message I want to encourage our listeners to know, that it is difficult, but you'll survive it much more than you would survive the addiction,
Yes.
and have a much better quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So we did cover that question, how a therapist can help a recovering person develop a spiritual life. We really
Yes, take the step seriously.
take the steps seriously, and don't hurry through the steps.
Yes.
You really have to take your time with them.
Yes.
I would say, what's the rush?
And also, you don't have to go through them just once. It's a lifetime process. You go back over them
yeah.
over and over and over again.
I think that's an important point, and I was thinking that while you were speaking, that this is not a linear process. This is a kind of a back and forth. It's kind of a
Yes,
dance,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a spiral in a way, if it had to have a shape.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not linear. It's not like you go from A to Z and you're done.
Correct.
It's as long as you're alive and you're facing different life circumstances. You're still going to go through struggles, and you'll be connecting with your spirit in different ways along the way to keep yourself going, hopefully.
And part of that is a step perhaps we don't talk about enough.
Which is that?
Step 11.
Yes.
We sought through prayer and meditation to maintain our constant contact with our higher power.
Mm-hmm.
I think we mentioned in passing last time that recovery people start to pray. And again, this is not a religious thing that they're doing, although it may seem that way. I hear people talk about bookends, that they pray.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Pray in the morning, I get on my knees and I ask God to keep me sober. In the evening, I get back on my knees and I say, thank you for giving me a sober day. I think that's wonderful.
Me too.
That you would pray for that.
Yes.
Okay, but the step also says there's a caution about praying for things of yourself, asking only to do God's will and the strength and power to carry it out. That kind of rings a bell with me in my Catholic upbringing, where we were told not to pray for ourselves. We used to call it, the priest would call it gimme prayers. Don't say gimme prayers, because it's all about you. And I think that's not very helpful wisdom, because we have to start someplace.
For sure.
Have to start someplace, and praying, asking God to help you stay sober, I think is one of the most wonderful things you can do. So ask God to help you stay sober today, and for anything else in your life. Help me with my debts, help me with this. But why don't you do that at the end of your prayers? So pray for all those people who need your prayers, for those people who have passed on. You may want to keep them in your prayers, and then add on this stuff for your own life. So people struggle with how do I do this? How do I pray?
Yes. How do people pray?
Okay, I think the first thing you have to decide is firstly to do it every day.
Mm-hmm.
Probably do it at the same time every day so that it becomes habitual part of your life. So if that's when you get up in the morning, whatever you do, whatever your morning ritual is, have a time for prayer then. At the end of the day, hopefully, a few more minutes of prayer then. I think it's important that you find a posture, physical posture, for praying. Now, growing up Catholic, we knelt and held our hands like that. I don't do that anymore. I found I sit zazen, sitting up on top of my buttocks and legs underneath me. That's useful to me, but other people do the lotus position. There are some people who sit in their chairs and keep their hands open this way. I think that's wonderful, because it means you're opening up your heart to Almighty God and to the higher power. Find the prayerful position, the posture, for you to pray. And if you know meditation, that's good. Keep yourself quieted down, get in a meditative state, and say your prayers. Focus. And try to focus on, okay, it's not God out there. It's God in here, about 1 inch to the left of my sternum.
It's in your heart.
It's in your heart. Focus your prayers in your heart. It's called affective prayer. Affective, not effect. It's affective prayer is effective.
That's right.
So
comes from your heart.
Prayer from the heart for everybody and for yourself, and for you to stay sober.
Amen.
That's the way it works.
Beautiful. That's exactly how it works. Thank you.
Yes.
I think that's a great place to conclude our conversation tonight.
Okay.
Is to focus on the power of prayer and to make it a daily practice. Find a comfortable place to sit, get quiet, focus, be grateful, express your gratitude. Pray for those who have passed on to the next world. Pray for those that you love in this life, and then ask God to guide you and help you and strengthen you for your sobriety.
Yes.
I think that's beautiful, Fred.
Yes, well, hopefully it's useful to people.
Yes, well, hopefully people will start to practice it and get back to us and let us know. Okay, well, thank you so much for making such a meaningful contribution to our show tonight. Once again, I'd like you to know that Fred can be reached at his private office number 358-4752, area code 845, and please visit his website, drdrobin.com. Please join me next week when my guest is the most delightful Mary Lukens of Woods Marketing, who will share her passion for gardening and how growing anything from tomatoes to flowers to so many kinds of gardens can nourish your body, heart, and soul. Until then, remember, if you are going to crave anything, crave living your life to the fullest, maximize all you have, and squander nothing. Happy 4th of July. God bless America, and God bless our precious freedoms. See you next week. Good night.
It's not just radio, it's Rockland World Radio. RocklandWorldRadio.com.